This is the Conscious Radio Network.
Wanted to welcome everybody to Conscious Radio Network. We have a special guest this evening, Andrea Perron. She's the oldest sister of the Perron family, 5 sisters. For those who remember the hit horror movie last year, The Conjuring, she is the inspiration, or brought the inspiration. So tonight we're going to touch base on some of the true accounts that was left out by Hollywood because it was too graphic. So anyway, I'm going to give the podium to you, Andrea, and start at the beginning of when you first was aware of the property, moving in and whatnot, and take it from there.
Well, thank you for having me on your broadcast. I appreciate being here. We need to go back decades, not years, in order to bring people up to snuff. And what I will do is introduce myself by saying that my name is Andrea Perron. I am the author of a trilogy of books called House of Darkness, House of Light. These were not the books that were actually used as a basis, a foundation for the screenplay for The Conjuring. The film The Conjuring was actually based primarily on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who did an investigation, conducted an investigation at the farm between October of 1973 and August of 1974. So it has elements of our story, and there are things in the film that are true, but they actually didn't reference any of the books directly. Not a single scene was lifted directly from any of the books because it would have been impossible for them to shear down 10 years into a 2-hour film. So essentially what they did was take information that I provided as a consultant on the film, and they took the information that was given to them by Mrs. Warren regarding their investigation of our property, and they created their own third story, which is The Conjuring. However, there were things that happened at that house that were so extreme and so violent. I don't even know. There were several episodes that occurred there. I don't know how they could be recreated on film if the technology exists to recreate them. But I will say that anyone who's brave enough and willing to suspend disbelief and willing to embrace the possibilities that exist, I would highly recommend that they read the books, because it's not a series of scary stories. This trilogy is a spiritual journey, and that's really what happened to our family. Living in that farm fundamentally changed every one of us in ways that were permanent, because once your mind is expanded, it cannot retract. So it changed each one of us, the 7 of us that lived in that house for 10 years, on that property for 10 years. It wasn't just the house. There was plenty of activity in the barn. There was plenty of activity in the woodshed. There was actual paranormal manifestations around the property. It was a 200-acre farm. My mother found it in June of 1970. The books start chronologically, and they end chronologically. Volume 1 begins in Cumberland, Rhode Island, prior to us moving to the farm. The end of Volume 3 is when we leave the farm and go as a family to Georgia, and in the process of doing that, discover that profound attachments were formed at the farm that were permanent in nature. However, from the moment that we arrive at the farm in Volume 1 until we leave it, it's pretty much all bets are off. I wanted to write it the way that I did because I wanted people to have a sense of the almost trance-like state of being there, the sense of timelessness about the place. And the best way for me to do that was to categorize the types of hauntings into their own chapters and subchapters. So, for instance, one chapter could be about Cindy at age 8 and a certain type of manifestation that occurred in the house with her at that time. The next story could be her at age 14, having something similar happen again, but profoundly different, and therefore requiring inclusion at that point in the story. So, a lot of people say, well, this is just written for spiritualists and intellectuals. But that's not the case. If people just open up their minds and absorb it and just read it in a very fluid way, then it sinks in and they start to feel like they actually lived at the farm with us.
Yeah.
My mother put money down on this farm the moment she saw it, within minutes of seeing it. She knew that it was compelling and incredibly beautiful place, and she wanted to raise her children at a place in the country, which is the title of the first chapter. It took 5.5 months for my parents to secure the financing to make this enormous purchase. It was in December of 1970 that we closed on the property. My parents closed on the property, but of course then Christmas was right around the corner, and my mother didn't want to move us at Christmas, nor was Mr. Kenyon, the man who sold the farm to our family, prepared to leave yet. He wasn't packed and ready to go. So we put off our trip to the farm up to the woods of Harrisville, Rhode Island, until January 11th, which is today, actually.
Oh, wow.
So in 1971, on January 11th, 1971, we moved to the farm. It was an extraordinary experience right from the moment that we got there. Now, keep in mind, we had visited this place a number of times, had gotten to know Mr. Kenyon very well. He loved us. We loved him. He really wanted us to have this house. He thought this would be a marvelous place for 5 little girls to have the opportunity to grow up, and he was absolutely right about that. However, I will say that all the times that we visited the farm, none of us recall ever having any kind of a supernatural episode. Nothing that we witnessed, nothing that we felt, nothing occurred to us of that nature. However, the day that we moved in, 4 of the 5 of us, of the children, saw a full-body manifestation of a spirit standing in the corner of the dining room watching Mr. Kenyon packing the last of his belongings out of the built-in china cabinet in the corner. And his focus was clearly on Mr. Kenyon. He appeared so solid in form to me that I thought that he was a real, living, breathing human being, and I greeted him and said good morning to him, and he ignored me like I was a ghost, and so I kept walking. But my sister Nancy saw him literally disappear.
Wow.
And it was that really started things. Cindy saw him, Christine saw him, April is the only one that didn't. But at one point, the thing that was most interesting to me was that at one point my father got off the back of the moving truck and he came into the house, and he was standing talking to Mr. Kenyon at the dining room table while Mr. Kenyon was packing a box, and that spirit was standing right there. We could all see him, but my father didn't.
So what do you suppose that is? Was this spirit sort of selective, possibly, in who he might have been showing himself to? And did you ever see this same spirit subsequent to this?
We saw him a multitude of times. My sister named him Manny. My sister Nancy named him Manny because he was a man and she was only 8 years old and not incredibly creative yet. So that's how he got his name. But subsequently, through my mother doing a plethora of historical research on people who had lived and died at the farm, she came to the conclusion that he was most likely Johnny Arnold, who had crawled up deep into the eaves of the farmhouse in the 1800s and had a bottle of horse liniment with him that he drank, and he died a really horrible death. His death was listed as a suicide, but chances are very good he just crawled up there with a bottle of horse liniment to try to get drunk, and it killed him. It's hard to say. I guess we'll never really know who any of them were. I mean, there were at least a dozen spirits that we saw over the course of that decade, some that we saw many times, some that we saw a few times, and some that we only saw once or twice. But for the most part, I would have to say that We certainly did develop a sense of who they were, and certainly developed the sense of their belonging there. My mother was always adamant about the fact that we should always have respect for the dead and that it was their house first.
Yeah.
Once we came to the notion, there was never any provocation in our family, never. There was no need to call them forth because just when we slip into that lulled into that false sense of security, this must be over, there hasn't been anything that's happened in weeks or months, that's when it would happen.
Yeah. Now, when how much time went by until things started to really dramatize, really heighten in activity, actually physical phenomenon? Being pushed or shoved or pinched, or how much time went by after the move-in date?
About 2 weeks after we moved in. Well, the first thing that happened, and this is a bizarre thing, just as an aside, I will say there were things that happened at that house that I never wrote in the books, including the fact that our dog, our family pet, was inexplicably and bizarrely killed within days of us moving to the farm.
Mm.
It was such a difficult thing for me to write about. And after having written about what happened to our family and our family pets in Cumberland, I just didn't want it to be too morose for the reader. I didn't want anybody rolling their eyes going, I'm sorry, I can't handle this. This is too sad. Because it's titled House of Darkness, House of Light for a reason. It was both. And there were many wonderful, extraordinary experiences that occurred at the farm. But there were also some terrible things that happened there. And, chief among them was the loss of our family dog, Schultz, right after we got there. And I never told anybody associated with Warner Brothers, New Line Cinema, or The Conjuring, any of the producers, and I knew them all, and never told them that had happened, and yet it made it into the film. There were 4 or 5 little cosmic kisses in the film that told me after I saw it, this is okay, in spite of the fact that it does not properly reflect or depict your family the way things actually happened. It's still all right, because it gets the story out into the world in a way that nothing else could have. And in the broad strokes, it did get it right. Good conquers evil. Love conquers fear. The Perron family had an extreme haunting that they not only survived, but thrived and went on in life. And those are the important messages that came from the film. But the little things, the strange little things, like the fact that the picture that's on top of the mantle in Shanley Caswell's bedroom, the young lady that plays me in the film, is a white folk art drawing of a cat. I have that hanging in my bedroom right now, and got it when we lived at the farm. They had no idea that I had that picture. They had absolutely no idea. There's no photograph of it anywhere, and yet the set designer managed to choose that one out of who knows how many she had to choose from in order to put a piece of artwork up on the mantel board in the eldest daughter's bedroom.
So it sounds like there are intervening forces also with the production of this film, and I guess some people would call them synchronicities.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, look at today. I mean, the 11th. I mean, there's a synchronicity right there. I mean,
I know. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the thing that's even stranger about it is, later on we'll have George Lopez join us, who is my paranormal partner in crime. I write with him and lecture with him and travel with him and do all kinds of paranormal partying out in the world, getting to know people, my readers, and we're working on a book together, and it's his birthday today.
Yeah.
And we found it, it's like, okay, you turned 8 years old on the day we moved into the farm. I'm sorry, that's just weird. It's reason enough to play the lottery, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I would have to say the biggest I think the biggest question that all of our listeners would have, as well as myself, before I heard you with George Norrie last year on Coast, and it definitely deserves repeating. And the way you explain it is so to the point, and like you said, it's a simple yet a complex answer. how could a family that size go through 10 years in a situation like that and go that long? There's some. I like the way you explain it, and please explain it because it means very well.
Well, as I've said in the past, there are many reasons why we stayed at the farm. And I'll give you a quick rundown of them in a moment. But what I will tell you is, in retrospect, upon reflection, I have determined personally that whatever it was that catapulted us to the farm, whatever it was that compelled us, whatever it was in the universe that conspired to get us that farm, likewise conspired to keep us there. And in that respect, I feel that it was certainly as much a blessing as a curse. We learned over the course of 10 years how to differentiate and what similarities exist between life and death. From the age of 12 years old, I have known, not believed, but known that there is something beyond our mortal existence. And the way that my mind processed that was, oh, this is good news. This is really good. Not everything that, it's not just ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It is a body vessel that we inhabit as spirit, but that we are all essentially spirit. And I think that there were messages imparted at the farm that it took 30 years to process this information. That is no exaggeration. I didn't pick up a pencil to start to pen these books until 29 and a half years after we left the farm. That's why when James Wan was coming on as the director of the film, he's like, I've followed everything that the Warrens have ever done. I've read every case study of the Warrens. Why did I never hear about this? Why do I not know about the story that they said was the most intense, compelling, disturbing, and significant investigation that they ever conducted? And the reason is because my mother told them no. In 1980, she told them no. But, what I will tell you is that we moved. Mom found the farm in June of 1970. We moved in today, 1971. And from that point on, it was as if we were trapped there. It was as if we were held captive there. And even though we could come and go as we pleased, it was a point of attraction. It was a portal cleverly disguised as a farmhouse. There was something that pulled us back and pulled us back. My mother, when she realized what was going on, my mother had already had 2 incidents. One of them we never even knew about or saw happen until she didn't tell us about it for a long time afterwards, and she wasn't even sure at first that it was a paranormal experience. She didn't know what paranormal was. She didn't know she didn't know the language to even use around the phenomenon that was occurring at the house. None of us moved into that farm thinking, oh, we could be moving into a haunted house. I was 12. April was 5. We were little stepping stones of kids. Mom was thrilled that we were moving into one of the original colonial homes in the United States. She was all about the history, all about, oh, my God, this is so incredibly important. This place was deeded in 1680. The house as it is now was completed in 1736. This is an original colonial home before the colony of Rhode Island was the state of Rhode Island. It was just an amazing, amazing, beautiful piece of property. Then as soon as we moved in, the economy tanked. People think that, this thing that we just went through, this little hiccup that we went through in 2008 was, I'm not saying it wasn't serious, and shame on the banks and shame on everybody that sabotaged our economy. But I remember sitting in line, pushing the car into a gasoline station, having the number on our license plate determine whether or not we could get gasoline. All of us would go so that in case we ran out while we were sitting in line, we could help our mother push the car in to put gas in, and then you could only buy I think 6 gallons or something like that. I remember the founding of the oil cartel and the embargo and only being able to fly in this country if it was for business. It was crazy. And this house and property that my parents had just invested what was a fortune to them and required, borrowing money from my grandmother and for the down payment. I mean, this was a huge, huge investment for them. A house, a barn, and 200 acres to raise their little children and, live happily ever after. And then for my father to come home from his first business trip away and have my mother show him the bruises on her neck from where she had been brutally beaten with a coat hanger by something that was invisible. He